Is present here and now, and in that awareness, let us pray. Father, Mother God, we give thanks for this moment and the awareness with which we hold this moment. Open and receptive to your love, open and receptive to your guidance. We allow ourselves in this moment to let go. Let go of all that we thought we needed, all that we thought we had to do, all of the tasks that await us. In this moment, we rest. We allow your love to flow through us. Filling us, transforming us, and spilling into this moment. Breathing in and breathing out in this awareness of your love, we give thanks. So it is that together we say Amen. Well, attack on the mystic. How many of you remember what you were doing 15 years ago on this date? How many of you remember the feeling that you had on that morning? I remember where I was. I was just waking up, sitting on the edge of my bed. Linda had turned on the TV, and the second plane was headed to the tower. So it was a life-transforming moment. I think that we all would agree, at least most of us would agree, that that's the case. If you'd like to share what you recall your feelings to be, let's do that. What were your feelings on that morning when you saw the towers burning, or you heard about the towers burning, or whatever the situation was? Sharon.
I was in my classroom. I was teaching in Fort Morgan, and my first class was an advanced group of ninth graders. And my daughter called and told me what was happening, and I had to get through that first hour with them, knowing what they had seen and what they had experienced. Our granddaughter, this was her birthday, and she was at Frills and Freckles. Her mom was teaching, and unfortunately the staff brought in a TV screen and ran it all day. Her birthday is the day that we all send her as much love as we can. Her name is Cody, and so send love out to Cody today too, please.
How old was Cody at the time?
She was 5.
5 years old. Wow. How about anyone else? Thank you for sharing that. Dick.
I remember I was out attending the final rites of my sister-in-law, who just passed after my brother about a year before, in California. My cousins from New York came out there, and he was in the house, and I was outside in our camper. And I had to run in and wake him up and let him know what was going on. He's from Arvada, was originally, but he was a customs agent. And just the incredible, incredulous type of a feeling that you have at that point is, this is a movie. You know, that was the initial thing that happened to us at that point. And like you said, it was glued to the screens. The rest of the day out there, but it was two conflicting sets of emotions there at the same point to me and family and our friends.
Thank you. Anyone else? When I was sitting on the edge of the bed watching this, and it was like it was a movie, and it was that feeling of angst, what is going on? Who is doing this? Why are they doing this? We have this perception that, we walk through the world as Americans, and certainly we know that there are people that don't like Americans. But up to that point in time, my perception was that, that was an individual kind of challenge, that anyone that I would meet as an American, anyone that I would meet, I would be able to have a good relationship with them once they got to know me, right? And so it was very difficult for me to understand why there would be such an attack. Yeah. So that feeling that we had that moment, or that morning, or that day, or that week, or month, or however long it was dominant in your awareness, do you have the feeling that needs to be healed? Do you have the feeling that there's something there that still is an open wound? Certainly our reaction to these experiences, Cody's at 5 years old. Wow. What could that do to a 5-year-old coming into awareness of things finally outside themselves? It's got to be very scary, very traumatic. Well, that was then. We perhaps have something that still needs to be healed from that. And my focus this morning is about our personal experiences where we have that feeling of attack. I am not a foreign policy expert. I don't play one on TV, and I do not pretend to offer a critique of how we responded. Not in this forum anyway. As many of you know, I will respond vociferously and freely in other forums, but not here this morning. The opportunity for us to look at this experience, though, that happened to us as a nation, perhaps as a culture, because it could be said that the attack was not just on the nation, but it was on the culture that we represent. That macro experience that happened to all of us, we can look at from an individual standpoint, from an individual perspective, and we can look at our feelings that we had in response to that attack, and we can perhaps identify situations where we have a similar kind of feeling in our personal relationships, in our personal experience, where we have been attacked without knowing why, where we have encountered great rage and anger at us without understanding why. And oftentimes our response is similar to the response that was undertaken by our government, and that is to find out who, to find out where, and to hit them back harder so that they would never, ever consider, anyone would never, ever consider doing such a dastardly thing again. Well, I know in my own experience that I have had that, who did it? I may ask why, I may not get that far. I may just want to know who did it, and then find out where they are and where their weak points are, and then attack them back, because frankly I didn't appreciate it, right? Now, I would like to think that I have grown beyond that point, that this is far in my past, when my response was that way, but it really doesn't make any difference because we can learn from it anyway. And we can bring that experience into our present life, and we can then consider how we respond. Maybe it's not such a violent attack. Maybe it's not such a overwhelming feeling of desperation and defensiveness that we might have in our personal. But what is it about the mystic and that allows us to imagine how a mystic would respond to a similar kind of situation? And that's not to say that we would expect that the President of the United States would be a mystic. It's not out of the question, but nonetheless, what I'm talking about now is at the personal level. What would it be like to be a practicing mystic in a situation where we are attacked in such a, well, in any level of magnitude? It would be fair to say that we are hardwired to respond in the same manner as we are attacked, right? I mean, we can, in fact, probably look at our survival here or our existence here as being the result of our long lineage of ancestors being successful in surviving at least to the age of procreation. that their reaction to the threats that were that they encountered on a day-to-day basis allowed them to survive such that we are here. And so from an evolutionary standpoint, we thank our ancestors for their skills in surviving. And we can look upon our personal experience and we can say, well, you know, when I made that kind of response that I imagine that my ancestors were so successful at, what was the effect on my life? We can certainly look at the response to the attack on 9/11, 2001, and say, okay, what were the consequences of our response? And we might be able to learn in our personal life from those consequences that we have seen. And those consequences that we experience in our personal life may have to do with our relationships. It may have to do with our careers. It may have to do with our financial wherewithal. But it most certainly will have something to do with our personal experience of life. It will have an effect on our consciousness, and we know that our consciousness is the predictor of our personal experience. So, if we consider that, for instance, the life of Gandhi, we have eulogized Gandhi in so many different ways. We have recognized that Gandhi was indeed a successful practicing mystic. By practicing mystic, I mean one who has the intention and the attention to be a mystic, not necessarily that we are successful in being a mystic. The definition of a mystic is one who achieves God presence, God realization in each and every moment. So a mystic being one that strives for God realization in this moment. And we, I think, all have had that experience where we have realized God in a particular moment. And it could be something that was totally unrelated to what we consider to be the spiritual pursuit. It may be looking into the eyes of a child and just having that wow, that awesome experience. It may be in a relationship that we have. It may be as we look at the setting sun and realize just where we are in this vast universe and how incredibly lucky we are perhaps luck is not the word, but just the realization that we are sitting on a planet a comfortable distance from its rather quiescent star. The star doesn't, it's not a Cepheid variable that increases its brightness by 100 times every so often. It has allowed us, that sun has allowed us to be here long enough that we could develop from the primordial soup into this state of consciousness where we are now. We can sit in the audience of the universe and realize just how incredible this experience of being alive today is. And that experience can be one that is so vitalizing that we are drawn into the wowness of the moment. Well, turns out that we can actually have that kind of experience more than the happenstance times that it happens for us. We can actually become a mystic. We can certainly practice becoming a mystic, and more practice will lead us to a greater and greater level of skill in bringing that realization of the awesomeness of this moment into our awareness. So Gandhi, in his life, he practiced being a mystic. And it turns out it was not until he was 35 or 40 that he began the practice. You all know that he grew up, came of age in South Africa. And in South Africa, Indians were considered to be the foreign blacks. And so their position in that apartheid society was at least as low as the black population of South Africa. But he was trained in the law, and he became a lawyer for his community. And there was much that he did in that age that one would not consider to be a mystic's practice. But it was in fact when he was starting to come into his midlife that he said, there's a different way, and he began looking at that different way and became what we might consider to be the ultimate contemporary mystic. When he was assassinated by a Hindu extremist, what were his last words? The recollection is that his last words, as he lay there bleeding on the ground, that his last words that could be heard were Rama, Rama, Rama. He was repeating the name of God. And in that awareness that here he was, perhaps knowing he was mortally wounded, that he was recalling God in that moment. That certainly sets a high bar for us, that we might be able to achieve that level of connection with God, that even in our dying moments, we would be recalling the name of God. I'm tempted here to tell you about my experience when I thought that I was, sure, I'll go ahead and do that. I'd had a wisdom tooth pulled, and the doctor had prescribed some Vicodin for me. And sure enough, the Vicodin did work. It was in the evening that I'd had the wisdom tooth pulled that morning, and my wife had fixed me a chocolate malt, and I was drinking that chocolate malt, and I realized that, wait a minute, I'm not drinking the malt, I'm actually sucking the malt through a straw. Now, you all know the problem with sucking through a straw when you have a wisdom tooth pulled, it creates what is called a dry socket. And a dry socket is, if you've ever had one, it's something that you would not wish to have again. So I had taken another Vicodin. I was standing there at the counter. I realized that there was something going on in my stomach, and I was really feeling lightheaded. So I went over and I sat down in the chair by the kitchen table. And Shannon and I think it was Troy at the time were sitting at the table. And as I was sitting there, I said, Shannon, give me a bowl, because I think I'm going to throw up. And so there I was sitting with this big baking bowl in my lap. And all of a sudden, there was this wave that came from my toes all the way up my legs, through my torso to my head. And what I said at that moment was, oh. And I realized that I had not yet achieved the mystical state that Gandhi had achieved. So I fainted, and the medics were called, and it took the EMTs several minutes to get there. There was a doctor, it turns out, an emergency room doctor that lives across the street. She heard the commotion going on. She ran across, and it was that I had low blood pressure anyway, which my doctor tells me is a good thing, but the Vicodin further lowered my blood pressure, and the result was that I did not have enough blood to my brain to remain conscious, so I passed out. Well, okay, so now I know I've got more work to do. As we look at our personal affairs, though, and as we look at how we respond to those challenges that we have caused by other people, that is, the attacks on us, it might be useful for us to recall that being a practicing mystic only requires intention and attention. Intention to be responsive to whatever is happening in our environment, and attention to notice how we are responding and to make adjustments as we encounter whatever it is that we're encountering. Well, Jesus offered us this advice in Matthew 5:38-40. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. Whew, that's a tall prescription, isn't it? As we go through our lives, we have these experiences that cause us to respond in some way. And our basic motivation, I'll just make a generalization here, and you can say, no, that doesn't apply to me, but I'm going to go ahead and make the generalization anyway, and you can refute it. Not out loud, because we need to get finished with this talk. But we encounter our lives with a desire to fulfill ourselves. Satisfaction, fulfillment, may be short term, it may be long term, but we encounter our day-to-day activities with the intention of satisfying in some way our personal desires. And those desires, we become attached to those. And those desires, being that we have attachments to, become expectations. And those expectations then are the basis for the pain that we have in our lives. So if we can encounter our life without those expectations, we are a monumental distance. Monumental distance? We are a great distance towards our goal of practicing as a mystic. If we can let go of our expectations and just be in the flow and respond to the environment, respond to the conditions, respond to the impetus coming from the various relationships that we have. If we can be responsive to those conditions, we are well on our way to having a mystical life. Well, what is it then that we need to do? Jesus tells us to turn the other cheek when we are attacked. What does that mean? It means certainly exposing a part of our body that is not in pain to further pain if the attacker wants to hit us. But it also means changing our perspective. Changing our perspective from what? From our perspective of fulfilling our desires. What is a change of perspective? A change of perspective may in fact be that we are, I'm not feeling sound. 1, 2, 1, 2. A change, and I'm coming through now, okay. And back down. Okay. So a change of perspective is to move from the fulfillment of our desires, right, to another perspective. And that other perspective just might be, why is this person attacking me? Why is this happening to me? You see, oftentimes we don't go to that point of why. And as a result, we respond perhaps in kind, or perhaps in the way that we are habituated, or perhaps in the way that we think is going to allow us to overcome the attack and get back on track to the fulfillment of our personal desires. So changing our perspective is an important part of our responsible response. So as we look at this then, turn the other cheek, give your cloak, walk the second mile. You know, it's said that when you walk a mile in the other person's shoes, you have the benefit of being a mile away with their shoes. But that's really not what that aphorism is about. That walking this second mile and being and seeing what the other person sees allows us to address the attack, whatever form that attack might be, allows us to address that attack from the perspective that Jesus offered. And this perspective, you have heard this before, but I am going to read it again. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Notice that the attacks that we have in our lives are personal tests. To test him, "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" And so what the lawyer was thinking was, okay, we're going to tie him down to one of the 10 commandments, right? Of which actually there are only 9, but we're going to tie him down to one of these commandments and drill down on that and expose him as the fraud he is. And Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets." In this one passage, Jesus offered us the key to living the mystical life. And that is to first and foremost love God with all your heart. Love all that is. Love the conditions as they are. Love everything as it is. Love your relationship, your positions in the world. Love it all with all your heart. And the second, which is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Why is loving your neighbor as yourself the same or like the commandment to love God with all your heart? Because your neighbors are as much a part of God as you are. So when you love God with all your heart and recognize that your neighbors are also part of that expression of God, then you are in a position to step back, to take a breath, to allow yourself to be drawn into the awesomeness of the moment. Love God with all your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. And in this practice, we are able to come into the realization, making real in our experience the presence of God. Why? Because we are expressing the presence of God. When it's written in 1 John that God is love, we can take that and we can say, in our experience, we can equate God is love to being our appreciation of the presence of God when we are unconditionally loving. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Love unconditionally. So here it is then. We are attacked. We change our perspective. We understand the motivation of the other. And we allow ourselves to step into a reality that is not based upon the drive of our desires, but rather based upon the realization of love in the moment. And then we can be responsibly. We can respond responsibly and be that mystic that we all can be. We'll have our meditation. As we come into our meditation, let us come in with I cast all my cares. As we settle into this moment, and breathe into this moment, letting go of all of those expectations that we have of this moment, just allowing the moment to be ours, unencumbered, unsullied by what we thought we needed to achieve. Breathing in and breathing out. We step into this reality of love flowing into this moment. And we let it flow. We let it reach the dark corners of our consciousness. We allow it to dissolve the fears that we hold in those dark corners. We allow it in this moment to stream out from us as a radiance, flowing in all directions from us into this moment. Blessing those in front of us, to the side of us, and back of us. Allowing this love to flow without any expectation of what it might achieve, but reveling in this flow of love itself. And we allow this short experience to be embedded in our memory, that we may practice this. Quiet times of our day, in the hectic times of our day, we take a moment to take a breath and feel this flow of love through us, filling us, transforming us, and radiating from us. And for this experience and this memory, we give thanks. And as we come back into this time and space, let us come back, sharing the words of the Lord's Prayer.